Libertarian Podcast.
And I have back with me today my friend Anish, who goes by his stage name Annihilate, when we are talking hip-hop, but we are going to be talking philosophy and political culture today, and some other topics as well. And how are you doing today, Anish?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. Thanks for being back on.
My pleasure.
Yeah, also, before we get too far into it, I got to say, I mean, this is going to inflate your ego a little bit. Your podcast interview that I did with you is like my number 2 most downloaded.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean,
that's great.
Take that to the bank, you know.
That's good.
But today, we wanted to steer away from music and hip hop, and we wanted to talk about something that you had briefly touched on last time you were on the show with me, and that was a book that you're writing. So tell us about that.
So I wanted to talk about the different parts that my book consists of. So for the sake of organization, I've split my book into 4 parts. These parts are, the first part is called reason. The second part is called emotion. The third part is character. And the fourth part is authority. But before I explain the parts of my book, I wanted to touch upon a few of the branches of philosophy so I can relate them to the different parts of my book. So there's metaphysics. This is basically a study of reality. So my first part focuses on reason. And reason is your only means to perceive reality and to act in accordance to it. So that first part is about metaphysics, but I also touch upon ethics, which I'm sure you all know what it is.
Yes.
So I talk about the part your reason has to play in making moral decisions. So the second part is about emotion. And the second part is basically emotion and its relation to reason. Like when emotion is a tool of reason, when it is rational and when it is irrational, and when it can cause bad decision making. The third part is called character, and basically, as the name suggests, I break down different character traits and talk about whether they are moral or immoral based on rationality. And then the last part is authority, and authority talks about 2 main subjects, and that is religion and government. So in government, I break down left-wing policies and right-wing policies and talk about the philosophical values behind them rather than just talking about the policies. And religion, I talk about how religion can be good and how it can be harmful as well.
And all of those are amazing topics to delve into. I mean, we could spend hours and hours doing that.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're not going to ruin your whole book, though.
Yeah.
Again, not to condescend. Remember, people, this guy's 15 years old, and he's like thinking thoughts and has like philosophy that is blowing my old brain away. And I think it's amazing. And if this is what our future looks like, we have a bright future ahead of us. There we go. Man, I've really been building you up today. On a topic near and dear to me would be the philosophy of left-wing politics versus right-wing politics. And I'd like to talk to you about that next. I know your book is going to cover this as well, but let's dig into this a little bit. Tell me where you think each one stands and your thoughts and feelings on each.
Yeah, okay. So I think there's 2 main values or 2 main ideologies that really make the left and the right wing. And for the right wing, it's individualism, and for the left wing, it's collectivism. A lot of people on the left do say, I've talked to liberals and people who consider that they're on the left also call themselves individualists. And I've even talked to right-wingers that are collectivists. But essentially, the main ideology behind each is individualism and collectivism. So the people who consider themselves left but are actually individualists, or consider themselves right but are actually collectivists, they're likely just going through confusion, basically where their political views don't line up with their philosophical beliefs. And this may be because of what they've been led to believe, because of their surroundings, because of the media, or it simply could be because they haven't delved deep enough. So those are the 2 main ideologies, regardless of what people's political views are. Because often, if people haven't really given enough thought or haven't really looked into philosophy as much as they could have, then they do tend to have contradictions between their political views and their foundational philosophical values. So the main thing about right wing, as I said, is individualism. So along with individualism comes independence, self-reliance, capitalism, the right to your mind. And basically the main idea is that people should get what they earn, and like people should get what they deserve. I'll also touch upon the links between like the differences and the similarities between what earned products are and what deserved products are. So so I think that's the basic underlying ideology of the right wing. And for the left wing, collectivism would be prioritizing a group of people over a single person. So this means that people don't get individual rights. People are expected to participate in this sort of groupthink. And if anybody steps out of this box, in an extreme leftist government, they would be killed, as we've seen in communist countries and many times in the past. So collectivism,
That's right.
yeah. So collectivism is basically a negation of your own mind to believe exactly what you're told and not think for yourself. And also, racism also stems from extreme collectivism, the belief that what one person does in a collective makes the entire collective responsible for it, collective blame. That is also a result of collectivism. So when we talk about movements like Black Lives Matter, the main thing about them is that they're collectivists, and that's the reason why they tend to be racist, but they just try to hide it more.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's good. And with collectivism, you see that more. I don't know if it's where you're at in India, but especially in the United States, collectivism, you see it happening. It's almost like tribalistic and not super unique, but unique to like city areas, urban areas where that groupthink just happens. I mean, one of our two big pockets would be, of course, like New York and LA. And they have this, like you said, it's like a hive mind where something gets repeated, from the mother brain, and it just spreads out to all the little worker bees, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So the thing is about collectivism and individualism is that both of them imply libertarianism or authoritarianism. Basically, individualism can't function without some level of libertarianism, and collectivism can't function without big government or some level of authoritarianism. So the thing is, I know in a political compass, there's separate directions for libertarian and left-wing. So basically, there can be a left-wing libertarian and a right-wing authoritarian. But the thing is, right-wing authoritarians have a lot more in common with the left, and left-wing libertarians have a lot more in common with the right. Because basically, if we talk about fascists or extreme authoritarians on the right, they have similar values to those of people on the left, communists. Fascists and communists, I think, are very similar. They might have slightly different political views and they might hate each other, but their main belief of that there should be redistribution of wealth, collectivism, that is implied with authoritarianism regardless of left or right. The main difference between right-wing authoritarianism is that there's also a sense of nationalism, a sense of extreme nationalism and like a national identity. So Dinesh D'Souza, he went on, Prager University, and he talked about the similarities, and he said that the only difference between communism and fascism is that there's a national identity for the right wing.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And I would encourage my listeners, if you have not read any of his books or seen any of his movies, it's top-notch stuff, and it will open your eyes, especially if you're on the fence politically. It will sway you in a good way.
And he's from India, so
hey, man, what's not to like, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that Trump pardoned him.
Oh, dude, that was so great.
Yeah,
because that was just such a stupid misdemeanor they picked him up on that anybody could.
It was a political prosecution, regardless of whatever people say about it. It was definitely a political prosecution, because no other person, and several people have done this, including Hillary Clinton. No other person has been prosecuted for a first-time offense of simply donating more to a campaign than they should have. It was only Dinesh D'Souza.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a total hit job on him, and I'm glad he's out. So that's a good unpack of collectivism. So now unpack individualism for me. So
the main property of individualism is something that a lot of us probably haven't heard of, and this is the idea that each person has ownership over themselves, which means that they have a right to their mind. Basically, they're allowed to think how they want to. They're allowed to do what they want to, and whatever they produce with their mind belongs to them because they have done it. It belongs to them. So self-ownership is the main thing of capitalism and individualism. And when we talk about self, we're really talking about the mind. If you've heard the phrase "cogito ergo sum," I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but it's "I think, therefore I am." So if you look at what conclusions you can draw from that, is that without the mind, humans can't exist, and without the mind, we basically can't do anything. Even simply surviving, simply earning enough or getting food, that also requires the use of the mind. So our existence is impossible without the mind. So that is the idea that you're basically referring to their minds. So if you have a right to your mind, you have a right to yourself, which means you have a right to everything that you produce and everything that you earn. So what that implies is a lot of people, when we talk about selfishness, a lot of people look at that in a negative light. And Ayn Rand did talk about in her book why selfishness is actually a virtue. But a lot of people misunderstood that. So I'd like to talk about that and talk about what selfishness really means. Because if we look at the definition of selfishness, what is it? It's prioritizing oneself above others, or having consideration for oneself. Most people think that implies not having consideration for others. But I think if you have both of those definitions from selfishness, it's contradictory. Because you can't have a consideration for yourself without having a consideration for others. The reality is that we live with others, and in order for us to succeed, in order for us to go forward, we need to know how to deal with people. Most of what we earn comes from trade, comes from dealing with other people in a mutual transaction where both people benefit. So basically, the idea of selfishness is where somebody seeks benefit, and that point of trade where both parties trade with each other, you can't come to that point without both parties having self-interest. And if you're talking about selflessness, it's always going to be a benefit at the expense of the other party. People talk about how selfishness is actually that, but if we're talking about what is actually best for someone, if they have consideration for themselves, obviously they'll want what is best for them. And doing the right thing, doing the rational thing, is what will lead them to have a more profound or long-lasting happiness.
Right. And also, I wanted to interject here. We're talking about Atlas Shrugged, I'm assuming, when we're talking about Ayn Rand's book, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. What's funny is as much good stuff as I hear about that book, and any snippet I've ever read or seen of her, I've agree with. I have never read that book. I really need to just sit down and commit and do it.
Yeah, for sure. It's a really good book. It's life-changing. I mean, you need to go into it with an open mind, because a lot of people hear that preposition, that notion that selfishness is rational, selfishness is right. If you actually think about it and listen to her ideas, you'll understand what she means by that. Because a lot of the acts that we consider selfish and wrong, that are actually wrong, aren't actually selfish, because at the end of the day, they don't benefit that person as much as doing the right thing would benefit that person.
Exactly.
So that's the confusion about selfishness. If we're talking about traits like narcissism, condescension, all of these other traits that are associated with selfishness, all actually have a extremely bad impact on that person's character and do not help that person. Even if they give them short-term pleasure, it's not going to help that person in the long run. It's not going to bring them long-lasting happiness. So having these sort of traits is not actually selfish. So when you're reading that book, like, to anyone who I'd recommend anyone to read this book, try to go into it with an open mind. I think that the problem is she didn't make it she did make it clear, but because she started with that notion, and because that book is known for that notion, people go into that thinking, what is she saying? So then they never end up understanding her ideas, and that's why the book is so controversial. But I think it makes a lot of sense, and if you actually put your mind to it and try to understand what she's saying, you'll gain a lot from that, and it'll influence your life a lot, and in a positive way.
Yeah, I need to add that to my reading list for sure. Although I get books recommended to me all the time. My reading list is, 50 books long now, and I'm just kind of taking them one at a time. No, that's good. Those are really good points. Even as nations like America. Trump has this crazy idea, quote unquote, of America first,
Yeah,
and that swerves into what you're talking about with individualism and
exactly.
collectivism and this selfishness. It's
Yeah,
not really selfishness in the long run. You have to make these deals, and
yeah,
get some mutually beneficial things
yeah.
going on.
Yeah, so like America first would basically mean having diplomatic relations with other countries, being able to trade with them. All of these things are good things and they help both parties. So putting America first is going to help America, and each country should put their country first. And that's how our world is actually going
Yes.
to prosper.
Actually, funny enough, this is going to be traitorous. It's one of the few things that Obama said that I agreed with. When somebody asked him if he believed in American exceptionalism, he's like, I believe in American exceptionalism. I
Wow.
believe that Indian people believe in Indian exceptionalism, and yada, yada.
Yeah. I, I think there are a lot of contradictions with Obama's philosophy.
Oh, yeah. We could do a whole podcast on
Yeah.
just shit posting Obama.
Yeah.
But anyway, so unpack that a little bit more about selfishness.
So when we're talking about selfishness, there's, as I made connections with the self and the mind, this implies that doing what's selfish would actually be doing what's rational. Because if we look at it, doing what's rational is actually going to help you in the long run. People think that rationalism or rationality means neglecting emotion or neglecting consideration for others or something like this, but that's not true. Rationality is basically acting in accordance with reality, and reality is absolute. So if I say my phone on my table right now is black, that's a fact. That's an absolute. Nobody can deny that fact. People talk about reality in subjectivism, but that I find quite a misbegotten notion, because at least how humans perceive reality, we can see, all of us know that reality is the same for all of us. And when we try to twist reality, that's when problems come. And that happens when you evade reality, you evade your mind, because your mind is your only means of perceiving it. So rationality is basically acting in accordance with reality, which means doing what reality requires you to do. And if you do what reality requires you to do, what's most rational for yourself is to do the right thing. What's most rational is to achieve happiness, and you can't achieve a long-lasting, profound happiness by doing wrong things. So I actually have this excerpt from my book about rationality, how it's an individualistic feature and how it links with selfishness. So this is a very short excerpt, but I think it covers this topic quite well.
Okay.
So rationality itself is an individualistic feature, which is the result of men using their mind, processing knowledge, integrating ideas, thinking about this knowledge in different ways. So when you do things for yourself, it means you are following your mind, which means you're making individual judgment through the process of identification, integration, and rationalization to make rational decisions. In that sense, the most selfish thing to do would be the most rational, because selfishness essentially is obeying your mind.
So if we're talking about selfishness, we could also be talking about self-sacrifice or altruism. Can you unpack that for me?
Right. So we need to talk about what sacrifice really means, because when we talk about sacrifice, we can say that sacrificing certain pleasures for the good in the long term, that is essentially good for you. And I agree with that. But the thing is, we shouldn't actually call that sacrifice, because that causes confusion. So to talk about this more, I wanted to read another excerpt from my book about sacrifice. So I basically talk about how sacrifice, if it's actually going to benefit you in the end, it's not true sacrifice. True sacrifice would mean doing something that's not going to benefit you at all. So when altruists say that you have to help others, that means that you shouldn't help others based on your judgment. You shouldn't help others based on your relation with them, or based on whether you think they're worthy of your help or not, or whether they are deserving of that help. The biggest virtue in the morality of self-sacrifice would be to help someone who you know to be unworthy. And you have processed this, and you know the right thing to do would be to help someone else. And also the way in which you help them, your way cannot be done, because then again, that would be selfish. That would be in your benefit. Because
Right.
helping others is actually a trade. Even if you're helping others and you don't have any material benefit to receive, you can often get an immaterial benefit, which is simply the knowledge that you did something in your judgment, you did something which you knew to be right, and that'll help you a lot. That immaterial value of knowing that you did the right thing is going to bring you happiness, is going to bring you good. It's helping others. When I say you should be selfish, I don't say you shouldn't help others. You should just help people who you think are worthy and help them in the way which you know to be the right way. And the only way you can know how to help others is by using your mind. And if you talk about self-sacrifice, you'd also have to negate your mind. So I think the problem with self-sacrifice and the morality of self-sacrifice is that it talks about a place where there's no benefit for anyone, and no benefit for the person who's doing it, the person who has skill. And basically that means that it's always going to be a zero-sum game. And when you help a person, it might not actually help them. It might not actually help them, right? So you might just be feeding immorality and feeding the evil within them and causing dependency, actually destroying their chance of ever being self-reliant. And this is the problem with the socialistic policies in the welfare state. If you're going to give people, if the government's going to supply people with, their livelihood, then what it's going to cause is them not being entirely dependent to the government and them not being able to ever rely on themselves.
Right. And I see that all the time, especially in the part of the United States where I am, that we're in a very transient area. And there are just people just begging on the streets all the time. And as a person who wants to sacrifice or, even have the best of intentions, like you're talking about, like a lot of our liberal friends, you want to just hand them that $5 or that $10 and be like, hey, man, here you go. Let me help you out. 9 times out of 10, I don't know how it would be where you are, but 9 times out of 10 where I am, they take that money and immediately buy drugs with it or alcohol. And so what help did I provide that person?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
so
continue.
I think the welfare state basically just helps to keep poor people poor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you
equal distribution
want to help,
of misery, I believe, is either what Churchill or Thatcher said.
Yeah. If you want to help people in a profound manner, there's no way that you can do it without receiving something back, whether it's an immaterial value or a material one. So when you help people, the way you know that you're helping people to your full potential and the way you know that you're actually helping them is when you receive a value, whether that value is satisfaction, happiness, or whether it is even a material value. And that's the idea of trade, because if we say that people, if we imply that helping others is going to hurt ourselves, that's not true at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't have anything. I was chewing everything that you said, so my brain was still processing it all. I'm like, man, this is right. This is good stuff. Now, was that? You said you were reading an excerpt. Is that an excerpt?
I haven't done that yet. I haven't done that. That was just free flow. And now I'm going to talk. Now I'm going to read the excerpt.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. So following on that idea of self-sacrifice, there's an excerpt from my book, as I mentioned earlier, that I want to read, which would help us come to a conclusion about sacrifice, what it really means, and the difference between sacrifice in the name of your values and sacrifice as the ultimate goal or the ultimate virtue. So sacrifice done in the name of your values in your own interest is not true sacrifice. It is true that there are certain things you must sacrifice for the sake of another, the things being your depravities and your vulnerabilities. The ultimate value for which you are sacrificing these things is virtue and decisions which are helpful for yourself. In a sacrificial morality, you're expected to commit the greatest form of sacrifice, a sacrifice in which there is no benefit to be had for yourself and no value to be received. It is a sacrifice of your values, and once your values are sacrificed, your character is deeply damaged and corrupted. So to conclude my thoughts about help and when help is proper and when it is improper and when it is actually help or whether it is trade or simply self-sacrifice, I have another excerpt from my book. This one's a bit longer, so I'm going to read this out. So helping those who face unjust suffering and those whose misfortune is not their fault is a noble act. However, what it also is a selfish act. There is a value to be traded. Even if this value is immaterial, there is a benefit for the helper. There is a use of mind and a pursuit of values. The decision to help those who face undeserved suffering is one that is helpful to the person who chooses to take it. A lot of us may think that a selfish person would not do so, and that's where the misunderstanding lies. Just because I'm describing selfishness in a positive light, it does not mean I support some sort of an idea where man must be completely self-absorbed and must not seek the opportunity to help others in return for a value. Just because I'm describing selfishness in a positive light, it does not mean that I denounce the idea of helping those in need. I'm denouncing the idea of holding need as the single criterion for a help or moral value. I am denouncing the idea that man must not receive any value in return for helping someone, lest he be described as no more than a selfish, immoral being. I'm denouncing the idea that man must be obligated to give away the products of his mind. And I'm denouncing the idea that man must negate his own mind.
No, that's good. That is really good. So those are some teasers from the book that's coming out. What I would like to know is, do you have a name for the book?
Actually, I do not currently have a name for the book. I'm really thinking hard about that. That surprisingly is the hardest part, not actually writing the book, but coming up for a title that sums up the book or makes people want to read it. So
Yeah,
I'm still
you
thinking
have to
about that.
have something that encompasses it all, but at the same time could be an attention getter as well. So yeah, you have to be careful about that. Not to put any more pressure on you.
Yeah. I think I'll come up with the title by the time I finish the book. There's no rush at the moment.
Wow. Well, we've got a lot of good stuff out today, and you have more than I could condense into a podcast between you or me. I'm thinking you should maybe start your own podcast. Do you have any plans or ideas for doing that?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about that for a while, and my podcast would basically be where I do talk about current events and new things, but at the same time delve deeper than most political commentators do, because most political commentators talk only on the base, and that is about politics. When I hear of a new event, I always think about it in terms of how it relates to my philosophical values. And that's something I would like to talk about when I start my own podcast. So I'm looking to do that soon, probably in the next month.
Dude, that's exciting. Yeah, because like I said, when I've had you on, I've done good numbers, so I'm assuming you would do good numbers as well.
I hope so.
Another thing I wanted to touch on while I had you here was both of our presences on social media. I've noticed that you engage with the other side of the aisle way more than I do. Like I'm good for 2 engagements, and then I'm kind of harken back to Herman Cain's old philosophy of save the savable, and I'm like, okay, that person is not savable. I'm not going to bother. But you actually engage, and you give, and I've seen your comments. You give people a lot of things to think about, and you're so patient. How do you do it?
There's some people, I take time to write a proper message where I'm trying not to condescend, even if they're saying the stupidest things. I'm trying to say it like I'm trying to say things in a way that maybe they'll actually think about it and not simply just denounce me as a right-wing bigot or a right-wing racist. But the problem is that still happens. I spend time writing something that is actually value-adding and something that they can just read for them to think about. And they shoot back calling me a racist, bigot, a homophobe, when I haven't even talked about race or anything of the sort.
That's always when you know you've won, even though maybe we're not looking for a win-lose thing.
Yeah.
But as soon as they start coming back with either racism or just personal attacks, then you know you've won.
Right. So the thing is, I'm trying to make an impact because I know simply talking to people that are like-minded is not actually going to make an impact. But while I do have value-adding discussions and conversations with people on the other side who actually understand my points, I've talked to many liberals, and that's mainly in real life. When I'm talking in real life to people around me, I can actually find a lot of common ground, and I can actually change their minds. Like I'm in a school, and the school is very liberal. I mean, I got sent to the principal's office for supporting Trump, and yeah, for having a pro-Trump message on one of our activities because it was political, and because I had a pro-Trump message, they sent me to the principal's office, basically. But
how dare you? Oh man! I mean, we've got wackadoo education here, especially our public education system. So it's been infiltrated by Marxist ideology, and it's just something that we have to fight. Anyway, continue.
But the thing is, when I engage with people in real life, I can actually understand them, and they can understand me better. And then if I talk longer, and I also think it's also different people on Twitter and on social media, you have a lot of trolls and extremists and stuff like that, and even bots. So you never know. But the thing is, in real life, it's a lot easier. And the thing is, I've actually managed to have an impact, but that's still on a very small scale. There are people in my class who are extreme leftists, extreme feminists, extreme anti-Trumpers, and at least 4 or 5 of them are now pro-Trump, and the rest are like now right of center.
And that's one of the gifts, if I can say that, of the Trump presidency, because a lot of people, especially younger people, don't know what it's like to live under right-wing ideology, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they only know what they've been told.
Yeah.
And a lot of them only have like a skewed view of history. Like if you look historically back when conservatism is reigning, I mean, the country prospers and a lot of the world prospers because of it.
Yeah. So the thing is, I think it's also a question of age, because at my age is like the part where people solidify their views. And after a certain point, if they go down that left-wing path, they are likely to be close-minded and stick with that. And it's the same with for a lot of right-wingers, but because of the nature of the philosophy, they tend to be slightly more open-minded. But I don't want to say that, like, make that a solid point, because I've talked to several right-wingers which I think are stupid and don't get the point of being right-wing. But the thing is, this is...
And Lenin would call them, I think, useful idiots, but I hate to use his...
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but so I think this is the age where, like, we can actually make an impact. So we need to expose people to both views and let them make up their own mind from young ages. And that's also a problem with the education system in the United States.
Well, in the marketplace of ideals, Marxism, communism, leftism can't win, like, historically, and so they have no other choice except to shout down the other side or use the talking points of, racism and sexism, bigotry, phobophobe.
Yeah.
And it's that closed-minded ideology, that collectivism, that's so dangerous because it isolates these young minds that you and I are talking about from truth, from not even truth, just even listening to the other side, just even giving the other side a chance. And it's dangerous.
Yeah, it really is. See, that's the thing, the difference between closed-mindedness and having strong values. Like, for example, me, it's going to be really hard to change my mind because it was already changed once, and I have very strong values because I know now. I know a lot more. I'm a lot more informed. I've done a lot of research. So at this point, it's very hard to change my mind. But I don't think that means I'm closed-minded. I think I still give a fair chance to people who have different opinions. And while I can get agitated sometimes, I try not to let that show out. And so that's what I think is important, like giving the other side a fair chance to speak, hearing out their ideology, even if that's not going to definitely change your mind, at least it will develop your ideology. For me, if I talk to people who are completely crazy, or people who are completely immoral, that actually develops my ideology, because then I understand what causes this irrationality, this immorality better. So you're always going to benefit by talking to people on the other side, talking to people with opinions that are different from yours, regardless of whether they're extreme. Obviously, you're going to have more value-adding conversations and you're going to make a bigger impact with people who actually are open to other ideas. But regardless of who it is, it's going to help you, for sure.
That sharpens your own mind. That gets your own philosophy. It puts your own ideals in check, so to speak, where you take a mental inventory of what you believe and say, okay, these are my points. He's giving me his points. She's giving me her points. Now I can form an argument and present them with something else, if they're open to hear that, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Anish, this has been really good. I love having you on the podcast. And before I let you go, though, I know you didn't want to focus specifically on your rap career, but Annihilate does have something new coming our way soon, doesn't he?
Yeah, for sure. So the thing is, with my rap, I try not to make it always serious with a strong political message or a philosophical message. I also try to make more mild tracks where I can just show my talent so more people can actually look at my rap. So then I can actually use my rap as a means to have an impact on people. So this track that I've released, that I'm releasing, not yet released, this is just straight wordplay, straight bars, and I'm sure a lot of you will like it. It's more of an old school style. So it's going to be out on my Instagram and my YouTube within a few days. As Ronald mentioned, my stage name is Annihilate, which is spelled ANNIHIL and the number 8. And my Instagram account is Annihilate Rapper. But my handles on streaming websites are just Annihilate. So be sure to check it out if you are interested in rap music. I'm sure you won't regret it. Yeah, thank you.
No, and thank you for being on the show today, Anish.
Thank you. It was a really great discussion. This really helps, like mapping out my thoughts, getting more material for my book. It really helps.
Yes, sir. Happy to do it. And that will do it for both of us here at Publitarian Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. You'll hear us next time? Yeah, that's what'll happen.
You've been listening to Publitarian Podcast. Copyright 2018.